Welcome to part two of lecture four for unit four. We are in week 5, and this lecture serves as the discussion for integrating formative and summative assessment, which includes the performance tasks that should be under formative assessment. So within this module, you have a couple of things that you could have used. So the first thing was this article, which is very brief. I wanted to make it brief because obviously you're working on your midterm. And hopefully you read through this and got some different pointers. The other resources here are noted. Sorry. So we'll go through some of those during this lecture. The objectives for this lecture are pretty simple. To review research-based definitions of formative and summative assessments. So through your reading and also just me going over briefly, you should have been able to review what research is stating as formative and summative assessments, which I felt was a little different from how it's communicated through teaching practices. Review methods of differentiating formative and summative assessments, and then explore resources for integrating formative and summative assessments. So hopefully through this, and then you'll get a feel for how to implement procedures for actually progress monitoring, meaning monitoring the accumulation of the new knowledge through the performance tasks that lead up to the summative assessment. So hopefully you get a lot from it. So before we begin, when we talk about evaluations and assessments, there's a big difference, and I'm not going to focus in on the definitions per se. I'm going to focus on what these two things do. So formative and summative assessments, when you think about them, it is important to consider the process by which the assignment is completed and the outcome. So they are completely different, and I'm going to be honest with you and say that upon gathering these resources, I did not know that I had been doing something that research-based would be incorrect in regards to implementing formative assessments. So the differences between the two are the performance assessments and then the product assessments. So obviously the performance assessments are formative, or that's you tracking the progress of the student accumulating the new knowledge. And these are behavior and task completions associated with the application of valuable learning experiences. So the way that it's supposed to go is the students are learning, they're performing the task, or they're completing some type of assignment that relates to the actual learning experience that they're doing, while the product assessments are the tangible outcomes or products of the learned outcome. Tangible outcomes or products of the learned outcome or the learned content. That means that it is the ending of a learned session or a learning unit or anything that you have delegated to be of relevance for them to have, and then you're assessing it at the end. So it's something that is tangible, an exam, a project, something that's the outcome. Now, I emphasize outcome and learned content because that doesn't mean that you're using this as a way to assess if the student understands something. This means that at the end, the summative, the product, is what they know. So it should be affirmed by this time what they actually know, which I thought was pretty interesting. And let me just take you back really quickly to here. So you'll see in the article, it shows assessment, evaluation, and then decision making. So here is where you're doing a lot of the formative You're doing the diagnostic assessment prior to you even starting the unit. And I know you're kind of like, what? That can be as simple as something as a KWL chart. It can be a quiz. It can be anything that tells you what the students know prior to them starting the unit that you're assigning. Next, the evaluation. So throughout the formative or the process by which they are acquiring new knowledge, ideally you are evaluating some of the things that they're doing. Now, the evaluation process can also include the summative at the very end. However, the summative is not the only thing within the evaluation process. So it's important, I think, to remember, because the decision making happens last, and obviously you can't make a decision based on formative assessments. You can only make the decision based on the summative, because by then you should have taught something, retaught it, taught it again, assessed it, taught, retaught it, assessed it. And then within the evaluation process, if you have any kind of last minute formative assessments, they should be those that indicate some type of evaluation that you're coming to, or maybe you're formulating a summative product that you want students to create, or maybe you're reteaching some last minute concepts. But the key thing here is that these two processes should include a lot of heavy reflection before you get to a decision. And the decision only comes from you really firmly understanding where the student is in regards to what they were supposed to learn, and then also how you've integrated processes for them to acquire that new knowledge, and then how you reshape the teaching so that they can get what they need. So if we go through here, and then they walk you through formative assessment, and then there. So just to emphasize, where did that go? Okay, sorry. Okay, so remember that formative assessments are the method of tracking performance tasks throughout each aspect of the learning process. So one of the fundamental goals for formative assessment is to help students develop skills for self and peer assessment. It should be a development process. It shouldn't be an assessment of their final outcome. To support accurate formative assessments, it's important for you to do the following things. First of all, you have to create a method of keeping notes of students' progress. I don't know how many times I've heard people say they are tracking a student's performance, but they have no evidence of what the student is doing. So one of the things I have done in my classrooms is to keep a chart on a clipboard. Very simple. And prior to the unit starting, I have the objectives at the top of it, and then a rating to see, how the students are doing in regards to that objective. And throughout the formative assessment, you can have the assignments that they're doing, then you can check them off and have it, 1 through 5 or something very simple that shows. But you have to have a record, because at the end of the week, or at the end of the teaching of the new idea, you have to be able to go back and kind of formulate like what you did to teach the skill, so that then if there are gaps, you can redo you have to rethink about how you're gonna teach it again, and then you teach it a different way, or teach it at the skill that still has a gap, to kind of reassure that you're doing all you can to make sure the student is getting or gaining this skill. So in other words, you have to have something that's tracking what they're learning, so that you can reassess what you're doing, and then how you can fill the gaps of anything missing. Also remember, diagnose students' learning levels or mastery of content before beginning new content. Hello. You kind of don't know what they're learning unless you know where they've started. Create clear learning goals. I don't know how to stress that more. If you want to know if your learning goals are clear, ask the students what you're doing for the day. Reveal the assessment process before beginning the assessment. So when it comes to you asking students asking students to participate or to engage in a thorough demonstration of what they know in regards to any type of content, especially when it's formative. You want them to know what they're expected to do. So if you're using literature circles, make sure you explain to them the process, include, the objectives that they're trying to master throughout that process and what is the end result. Build in multiple opportunities for students to process new knowledge. So this is where the differentiation comes in. You have to meet the students where they are in order to get them where you want them to go. So it may require you to differentiate a lot of the processes to acquire new knowledge. Remember that formative assessment, a primary focus of formative assessment is to identify areas that may need improvement. These assessments are typically not graded and act as a gauge to students' learning progress and to determine teaching effectiveness. So that means that instruction should be altered to adjust student learning outcomes. And then formative assessment is ongoing and should occur frequently. And these are a few types of formative assessments that you can look over on your own time, because I don't want to take too much time. I'm already at 11 minutes of this lecture, so I'll speed it up. But there are lots of different ways that you can assess students throughout the formative assessment process, or them acquiring the new knowledge. But just keep in mind that they need to be aligned to the end product in some way. Okay. For summative assessment, I think we have overused and underused this. Summative assessments represent the product assessments or the tangible outcomes of learning objectives. So typically here, no more formal learning is taking place at this stage, other than incidental learning, which might take place through the completion of projects and assignments. So that means that you're done teaching the objective and that you're assessing the objective. If you are not done and students are still not ready, then the summative is not going to be as effective or useful for gathering data about how much they have learned, because obviously they didn't learn it if they're still asking for help. Remember that summative assessment is more product-oriented and assesses the final product, whereas formative assessment focuses on the process toward completing the product. Note that if you identify gaps in learning through outcomes of produced products, you will want to integrate formative assessments that follow to review missing skills. So if you have a product at the end and students didn't fare well, then it might mean that you need to reteach those skills in another unit or visit them. So for example, close reading. If I'm teaching students how to identify context clues and they just don't get it, then I'd reiterate the same skills in another book or another unit that looks at it maybe a little differently to teach the same skill. And here are some examples of types of summative assessments. So remember, I know that you all are somewhat familiar with differentiating, but with assessments, you should be differentiating the formative process and also the summative process, meaning that you're creating multiple pathways to allow students to generate and process knowledge. The outcome should represent the diverse methods of learning. So for example, if you're allowing students to participate in stations, maybe the outcome or the product would be a choice board where they produce their selected project. The keys to differentiating assessment includes integrating authentic assessments that offer a variety of methods for students to demonstrate a final product of their learned knowledge. I do understand that we all have state testing, but you can integrate different phases of demonstrating knowledge. Maybe the state exam is something that they all do collectively, and then you have two different aspects or one other project that students can do to demonstrate their knowledge from class level learned content. Remember that reshaping and revamping the sense-making process should be happening throughout the differentiating process, and also continuous reflection of teaching content and approaches to ensure instructional approaches and content are adjusted during formative assessment. So there should be a continuous reflection of what you're teaching and then how you're teaching it to ensure that students are learning what they need to know at the pace that fits their learning preferences. So let's take a look at some of these examples. You can look at a lot of these on your own. Here, this resource gives you options to differentiate in content, process, product, and learning environment. So here are a few examples, which a lot of you probably already know, but just remember that you actually have to track these things. You do not want to do all of this hard work and then you don't even know, what the end result is. This example here gives you a kind of breakdown of the student's role and the teacher's role throughout this process so that you kind of understand really what is supposed to be happening. Here we have 54 different examples of formative assessments, and I thought this was pretty cool. I also added postcards, which I thought was cool. 3 times summarization, 3 things, and you can adapt these. This is for elementary levels, most of these, but you can adapt these to a higher level for those of you who teach middle school and high school. Venn diagrams is something that everyone can do. Visual be the illustrator. These are things that all of us can do at some point. Mini whiteboards, create something. Check for transfer, extension projects. So most of you already do some of these things. Here we have a list of over 100 assessment ideas and products of learning by category. So here are the traditional ways: teacher design tests, quizzes, standardized tests, and then writing. Write for actual audiences, which used to be our end of course exam for 11th and I think it was 9th graders. Yeah. So here are some performance tasks that you can kind of try to do, and if you want any instructions on how to do these things, please let me know. And here are some other things. The portfolio is becoming very prevalent, especially in higher levels of learning. It's in the college level. If you did this in high school, it would help prepare the student for some of the expectations that they would be required to do at this level. So just keep that in mind. This is becoming a very popular, especially digital, as a way to kind of showcase the student's ability to perform the task, which then gets transferred into their ability to do the job. So just a couple of examples here. I also have another one for K through 5 that I added into the actual module, so take a look at that for those of you who are K through 5 teachers. So last but not least, just to wrap it up, final thoughts: continuously reviewing completed work that is considered formative. These are some things that you should be doing throughout the formative and summative assessment. And remember, tracking the student's progress or the performance work that they're doing in between the formative and summative is imperative, because that's the only way you'll know what you need to change and or modify. So change target goals and requirements to fit areas of challenge. Remember the difference between performance assessments and product assessments, and then align all your activities to ensure you are using performance tasks that produce the desired product assessment. So as you review your gradebook, make sure you understand and know exactly what you're using and then how you're using it, so that you can better your grading tactics within your classroom, and also improve, I guess, the learning outcomes of students overall. All right, that concludes this lecture. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'm really looking forward to your midterm projects and how they combine to align with the final. And just to let you know, this is not a wasted time. This is your evidence when you go up for your evaluation, which most of you will be going for some type of evaluation in the next couple of weeks if you haven't already. So it demonstrates your ability to do certain things, and it also demonstrates the tangible things that you're doing within a classroom to meet the goals and expectations on the district level and also grade level. So hopefully you have enjoyed putting your things together. If not, see that it's useful outside of this classroom. Okay, have a great day.